To welcome all of you as we kick off the National Origin Recognition Month celebrations. And it truly is an honor to introduce today's speaker, Trent Hall. Trent serves as the Community Outreach Supervisor at the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity. Trent is a facilitator, educator, and a sociologist by training, and has worked for Howard County government for the past 5 years. And his work primarily has focused on equity, cultural awareness, effective communication, and community engagement. Trent graduated from Pennsylvania State University in 2012, and he has taught college-level courses focused on effective communication and the tools needed to tackle contentious subject matters. Trent has spent the last 11 years focused teaching others the fundamental tools needed to honor our collective humanity. So without further ado, please welcome our speaker, Trent Hall.
Thank you. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It's good to see all of your faces. And for those of you that I can't see, I know that I can feel your essence. I can feel your spirit. And so today, I know that we don't have a lot of time, but what I'm hoping is that today can kind of be a little bit of a crash course, as a springboard into the awesome celebration that we get to talk about this month, which I would actually like to show a video with our county executive kind of bringing that and ushering it in. But this is the beginning of National Origin Month. And so before I dig into anything about my own presentation, what I would like to do is show a message from our county executive just to prime us and get us to have an understanding of the importance of this historic event. And so you all should be able to see your screen. I can make sure it's full screen.
Trent, we can't hear him.
Oh, okay, hold on. Let me try one more thing. All right. It's not a party unless there are tech issues.
Exactly.
Okay, I think this should work.
As a nation, the United States of America has benefited tremendously from the culture, ideas, skills, and abilities of generations of diverse immigrants and people of national origin from every corner of the globe who came here to work, learn, and for a higher quality of life. Howard County is a proud home to a vibrant blend of cultures, skills, abilities, and generations from around the world who seek equality, freedom, and opportunity in America. Because of our rich diversity, people of many origins have contributed greatly to our society, our economy, our workforce, and our innovation for the future. We are committed to inspiring each person to reach their full potential, regardless of their race, wealth, religious beliefs, or country of origin. Howard County should promote workplace and social equality for all, regardless of national origin. I am so proud to join the National Origin Alliance and proclaim March as National Origin Recognition Month in Howard County. Diversity is our strength, and we must build upon the values which unify us for a better community, country, and world.
All right, everyone. So that was an amazing message from our county executive, which is essentially us springboarding ourselves into this month, which is an opportunity for us to honor the collective humanity of all of us that exist within our county. And not only that, but specifically focusing on our immigrant populations of people who immigrate to our county in order to have a better life, to connect in the ways that we connect to our own community. And with that being said, it's also important to recognize that as a part of that, there are hardships, there are things that intentionally have hiccups in the way that we interact. And so it is important for us to make sure that we lean into our collective humanity, which essentially brings me to the title of today's speech. And so this is going to be a really quick crash course into things that we explore into much more depth when we have time. in other spaces within the Office of Human Rights and Equity. And so what I'm hoping is that this will give you kind of like a really quick appetizer into things that you want to explore further into, so that you can become the most refined version of yourself. And as a collective, we can become the most refined community that we can be. So now I'm going to screen share the PowerPoint. Please let me know if there's any issue with the screen share.
Yeah, we see it, Trent.
Everyone's good? Okay, hold on one second. Oops. All right. So starting off, it's really important for us to have just a collective understanding of what is a dominant piece of culture that influences all of the ways that we interact with ourselves, with one another, and then collectively the ways in which we interact with our county. And so what we're seeing on the screen right now is just a really quick crash course representation of Western culture, and essentially the Western cultural lens that we all wear, that we walk through the world with. And when I say we all wear, this is essentially the lens that you wear as an American citizen, as someone who exists within American culture. And so it's important for us to have an understanding of how this lens can dictate the way in which we understand ourselves, as well as the way in which we understand people of different cultures, people who don't necessarily fit within the ideological or cultural realms that we're used to interacting with. And so something that's really important from a baseline understanding, we need to recognize that when we're talking about a Western cultural lens, we're talking about this idea of rugged individualism. We're talking about these Western standards of medicine, which can definitely be seen right now, and I'm sure people are understanding. When we're talking about this idea of rugged individualism, we're essentially talking about ideals that indicate that a person essentially doesn't need anyone, that they should be self-sufficient, that they should be independent, and that they should be autonomous outside of government, outside of assistance from the community, essentially just being self-reliant. It's also assumed when you have this cultural lens and expected that trust and respect are given to authority regardless. So this is any system. We're talking about police force. We're talking about anything of any structural security, and so of any structural authority. I apologize. And so the point is that when we have this Western lens, when we're immersed in this Western culture, there's an expectation that we are giving authority respect and trust no matter what. Not only that, that there is a higher degree of value placed on formal systems of intervention as opposed to informal systems of intervention. And so the difference of this would be going to a rehab facility as opposed to getting together with your community and people sticking together with you and understanding how they need to support you for you to get past whatever it is that you need. And so within these models, you might start to see where we can start to develop, depending on who you are, what culture you're from. If you migrate to this area, if you migrate to the States, there might be some ways in which the cultural lens, the ways in which people are using this cultural lens to interact with the world might actually combat or not align with your country of origin, with your culture, with your disposition, your perspective on the way that you walk through the world based on identity markers. And so moving into that exact concept, identity markers, what we need to understand is that as human beings, we categorize things. We place things in boxes. It makes it easier for our survival. And so once we understand this concept, and what we like to focus on, especially when we're trying to get people to understand these concepts, is that this is not about being bad or good. This isn't about being evil or essentially being a bad person or pointing out who's being a bad person. What we're recognizing and what we're trying to honor is the fact that we're all human beings. And from a baseline human level, there are ways in which we essentially put people in boxes in order for our own survival, in order to understand how to walk through the world without harm. And there are times that unfortunately this dictates our actions where it undermines someone else's humanity. I'd suggest that when we're utilizing this without questioning it, without leaning into our curiosity, or trying to invoke some empathy whenever we're interacting with other people, that we're actually undermining our own humanity as well. So we're undermining collective humanity. And so when you're looking at this iceberg, what it's representing is anything that is above that waterline is essentially the things that people are going to look at and be able to determine based on their own lived experiences, how they feel about you. Stereotyping, putting you in a box essentially based on what they believe you exist as. And it can be, again, from lived experience or something that someone might have told them. But essentially, it's not necessarily backed by any concrete information, but it's something that they can visually see. And so where we see that waterline kind of splitting things in half, those are the things that we can kind of recognize, you can kind of see from a visual standpoint, and things that you can't. So nationality, physical ability, ethnicity, wealth, socioeconomic status, culture, and religion are those things where you can kind of get an idea or make an assumption about someone based on these things, about who they are, where they're from, what culture they have, the language that they might speak based on these things. But for the most part, they're actually not visible. And so the things that are at the top, skin color, race, gender, and age, are the things that oftentimes people use to dictate how they are going to treat us as we walk through the world. Not only that, it influences the way that we also interact with other people. Essentially, not being able or not having this awareness means that we're operating and allowing our reptile brain, if you will, to control how we're understanding people instead of actually leaning in and understanding that there is a lot more beneath the surface. All the things that make up who a person is, the value systems, beliefs, work style, perspectives, talents, all of these things are essentially not visible. The things that make up the sublimation of who someone is. However, the way that we oftentimes interact with people is based off of those things that we can visually see or things that we can make assumptions off of. And so as we get into an understanding of our specific county, Howard County, what we need to understand is that this is a county where it is a story of immigrant populations creating a beautiful, beautiful space of people collectively coming together for the intention of existing and honoring one another and honoring the differences that we have. And so what we're seeing on the screen is just a data representation of how that can be seen. And so from 2000 to 2017, you can see that there is an influx of different people from the race and ethnic standpoint. But again, this is from one dynamic. And also what is very interesting to make sure that we talk about is that when we're talking about race or ethnicity, we have to understand that it is not necessarily breaking down every single representation or every single person that exists. This is essentially the boxes that exist that people might feel like they have to categorize themselves in. And so moving forward, there are definitely spaces where census data has tried to parse this out so that we can get a better understanding. But ultimately, what I'm going to bring, the point that I'm going to continually bring back that's being pointed out right now is that these are just data points. They do have significance and value in us understanding our community, but it is not the way that we actually lean into refining our collective humanity as a community. This essentially, data points can cue us into where we need to look, cue us into disparities, cue us into things that might not be as prevalent. And so again, this is just another breakdown. This is actually from 2018. The last one we looked at again was 2000 and 2017. The current census data should be up soon, and we actually should see what we're at now. But again, we can continue to see that trend of increase, where there are more people of color, more people of different ethnic backgrounds that are existing within confines of Howard County. Now, as we dig into national origin and we think about some more of the complexity as we dig deeper into that iceberg, the ways in which we see each other, the ways in which we're influenced by things that we might not recognize, those invisible strings, if you will. We also need to understand that we have a large an amazing immigrant population. And we need to understand also with that immigrant population, what does it look like? Not for the simple fact of just categorizing, but if we're truly trying to align and create a space, much like the county executive expressed in that message, we need to understand what cultures actually exist in this space, how they might be undermined, how there might be cultural things that are codified within our structures that might inherently undermine some piece of someone's culture that might need to be changed, shifted, altered. And so when we're looking at data, again, it is important for us to recognize that these are just simply data points. These are just numbers, and they don't tell the fully fleshed out story of a human being. It does allow us to have an understanding of where we should be pointing energy, where we should be putting energy into in terms of recognizing what we should shift into. And so the screen that you're looking at right now breaks down the global diversity in Howard County. So if we're looking at diversity from a global scale, immigrant populations, people of different nationalities that move into Howard County, what we can see is the top three are El Salvadorian, Indian, and people of Chinese descent. And it breaks down those numbers. And again, this is from 2018. And so this information is important for us to recognize because this, again, helps us recognize some of the things that might be disparities. And some disparities that I think that have come out and that I've had to interact with in the work that I've been a part of is just making sure that we have true access to information. And so if we have a large Spanish-speaking population, and that is their first language and they might be in the process of learning English as a second language, we need to make sure that we have resources that are also in Spanish, especially if we have a high population size that needs those resources. We wouldn't know that without this data or without understanding what the breakdown of this data is. Now, in order to make sure that we're implementing that the way that we should, we need to make sure that we're actually immersed in the community, talking to people, engaging with them, not necessarily just looking at these numbers, because it's really easy to just prescribe, to create something based on some numbers without understanding the humanity behind it. As we move to the other column, when we look at foreign-born individuals, 20% of the population, about 20% of the population is foreign-born individuals between 2017 and 2018. And this is increased. It's increased every year, which also very interesting, and why it's also important to double down on this notion that the county executive was talking about, is that we are at a higher average of national origin and foreign-born population than other states in the United States, and other cities in the United States. And so we're at about 20.6 right now, and the average is 13.7. And so what that means from a data standpoint is that there are a lot of cultures and ethnicities and dynamics that we need to be willing to engage in. We need to be willing to shift, understand, educate ourselves on. That might not be the same exact thing for places where foreign-born individuals or populations aren't as high. It's just a matter of making sure that we're honoring the citizens that we actually have in our spaces. Again, and I want to kind of wrap this up because I don't want to go too far into the data piece, but this is going to connect to the end goal. And so again, making sure that we recognize that there are a lot of different people within our county, that we have a very diverse county, but also recognizing that there might be disparities, that the way that people might be experiencing their identity, that the way that they might be experiencing the way that other people or systems are interacting with their identity within the county might not be what we think. And that doesn't necessarily mean that we're bad or that it's done intentionally, but we need to have awareness and we need to be willing to wade in some of that uncomfortable territory to essentially call out the things that are not working, to essentially not continually put Band-Aids on broken limbs. And so as we continue to understand, okay, how is our county, the makeup of our county actually broke down? What does it look like? What's also important is to pay attention to where populations are distributed, whether it be from a socioeconomic standpoint, based on like how much money you make, or a religious standpoint, or a race standpoint or ethnic standpoint. I'd say that for the most part, in Howard County, socioeconomic status and race are really important for us to have an understanding. Really important for us to understand where populations are placed, how that corresponds to resources that are allocated in the infrastructure of that, and then how that connects to our perception of said group, said space, because all of it is intertwined. All of it has intersectionality that we need to understand in order for us to make sure that we're honoring the collective humanity of all people. And so what you're looking at right now in Howard County, this is essentially the concentration of Indian, Korean, and Chinese individuals and where they live. And so oftentimes people like to interact with this idea of like self-segregation, that people essentially maybe just want to live by people who look like them. That is a very small amount of the reason why people choose to live where they live. People live where they can live. And so when we're looking at these concentrations of different races, of ethnicities, what we need to be asking ourselves is, what is the story behind this? When we think of these different parts of the county that are being illustrated, where there's heavier population of Indian, heavier population of Korean, or heavier population of Chinese, what does that communicate to us? What does it mean in the scheme of how we perceive our county and how resources are allocated in those specific spaces in the county? Furthermore, as we overlay these three with each other, it seems that each population has kind of like their distinct space where they live. Now we break down the Black population, which is separate. We can see that, again, completely different area, distinct population, but we also have to ask ourselves that same question. What do we think of when we think of these areas? We think of our Long Reach, our Harper's Choice, Guilford areas, socioeconomic status, when we think of resources, all of these things are intertwined and connected. And so this isn't to say that this is telling us the 100% reality of all people within our county of these origins, but what it does is it helps us understand that there might be some disparities that are at hand, that are influencing the citizens negatively that we might not be recognizing. And so without that awareness, without us being able to wade in the uncomfortability to understand what is being communicated in charts like this, in data points like this, it's impossible for us to truly get to a space where we're honoring all people, regardless of national background, regardless of ideological understanding, regardless of where they stand from a religious standpoint. That all of their identity markers, who they are, the sublimation of their humanity, is honored and valued just as any other person in the county. And so again, I wanted to make sure that I'm shifting us away because there's so much more we could go into detail in when it comes to data points, when it comes to disaggregating data, which is essentially some of the trainings and presentations that we have. We specifically go into disaggregating data. And what I mean by disaggregating data is breaking the data down so that you can actually understand what it's saying. Taking those data points, connecting them to other data points so that you get the true story instead of getting shifted data points. And so it doesn't just matter if you have all this data. It doesn't just matter even if you disaggregate data and you understand what it's actually communicating. You have some awareness of it, because all of that is essentially just numbers. That's not going to actually help us get to a space where people can interact with each other, leaning into their collective humanity, refining themselves so that they are collectively willing and able to understand, to seek understanding, and to empathize with those that might seem different than themselves. And this is from a baseline, we're not just talking about race, we're not just talking about national origin, we're not just talking about hobbies, we're not just talking about lived experience, we're not just talking about any trait that you could quantify as an identity marker. We're talking about the sublimation of a person holistically. How do we honor that holistically? And the way that we do that is not with data points. It's not with research. That gives us a window into what we should be doing. But the ways in which we actually understand these concepts, that we truly lean into our collective humanity, is with communication skills. Understanding the concept of cultural humility, which is essentially knowing that we don't know. having an awareness of our own cultural bias and not allowing it to fully dictate our actions. Some of the things that we want to ask ourselves, or some of the things that are floating around in our mind that can help us make sure that we're on this path, that we're not allowing our preconceived notions, experiences that we've had in the past dictate how we interact with the person in front of us. We can ask ourselves these questions. What is my cultural lens here? How is my culture, ethnicity, background, how is it actually influencing how I'm viewing the situation? How is it affecting my viewpoint, perspective, or the actions that I'm doing in the moment? And where might this person be coming from? Thinking about the ways in which they might be influenced by my identity markers, by how I present. All of these things, if we have an awareness of them, give us a clear understanding of how to move forward. Giving us that ideal of awareness, being able to affirm who we are as well as who someone else is entirely, and then being transparent in the way that we're interacting with them. So this sounds all fine and good, but it's really important for us to also just give concrete tools and skills. It's one thing to talk about it. It's another thing to actually have it tangibly in front of you and to also have the experience of understanding what it feels like to go through this process. And so not only as the Office of Human Rights do we make sure that we're trying to disaggregate this data so that people can understand how we interact with one another from a data set point, but we're also making sure that skill sets, lenses, and tools are given in that we're actually practicing them. Experiential learning, having an experience where you know it intuitively in your body as opposed to someone speaking at you. If we had more time, that would actually be the ideal way of how I want to present this material even. And so we lean into experiential learning, we lean into tangible tools, we lean into making sure that we're giving our citizens actual items they can use to interact and shift the way that they're seeing the world around them. And so the first thing that we have is a lens, and essentially a lens. I'm a glasses wearer. For those of you that wear glasses, this might resonate with you. When I have my glasses on, I can see the world very clear. The finer details of life, all the edges, I don't run into any walls or anything like that. When I don't have my glasses, things are super distorted and I can't really tell. I've actually even noticed that it's harder for me to hear, and I think it's because I read lips. And so it alters the way that I view the world, right? And so when we're talking about a dignity lens, this is a lens that you can put on where you can see the inherent human worth and understand how we arrive at places of honoring that inherent human worth or violating that inherent human worth simply based on normal interactions. Having an awareness of how we interact, any behavior, any action that we exist in, filtering through our way of being, which is essentially how present we are in the moment and our intention. Why are we doing this? And it filters through and it arrives one of two ways. We're either going to honor the dignity of ourselves or another person, which is the inherent worth, inherent human worth of another person, the sublimation of who they are, their dreams, their aspirations, hopes, desires, everything about them is equal to you. Or if we're unaware or we're not being mindful, any behavior, any action can pass through our way of being, which is how present or lack thereof, how non-present we are in the moment, and the intention that we have or the intention that we're not aware of, and it can land in a space of violating someone's dignity. Where you're essentially saying that someone is greater than or less than yourself. Their dreams, their hopes, their desires, sublimation of who they are as a person is less than you. And there are ways that we walk through the world and we do this frequently as human beings and we don't recognize it. Especially in spaces where there might be ideological differences, cultural differences, perceived or otherwise. And so this skill is a way for us to have an awareness of not only how we're possibly being influenced by our own lived experiences, by the things that we're seeing, that we're making assumptions about and not questioning, or how we're just influenced by the way that we walk through the world because of our demographic. You also have the ability and power and control to dictate and decide how you want to operate with other people. If you would like to honor their dignity or violate their dignity, regardless of what ideological marker they come from, regardless of what identity marker they come from. Coupled with that lens is an actual tool, which is reflective listening, something that we probably often do, but we don't do with intentionality. And so we break down the different types of reflections that you can use, the purposes of when you would want to use them, and how powerful they can be when you're simply giving someone back what they're communicating to you, showing them that I am actively listening to you. I am empathizing with you. Very powerful stuff. And so what we essentially do is we are connecting, again, the idea of disaggregating, understanding these data points, these things that are important for us to understand to point us in the right direction, especially when we're talking about policies, when we're talking about implementation of system change, while also making sure that on an individual level, people are understanding the skills that are fundamental for them to lean into our collective humanity. And so if you're thinking about it from a tiered system, it's us making sure that not only are we doing preemptive and reactive work when it comes to discriminatory practices or the ways in which we interact with each other, but we're also trying to make sure that we're approaching it from an individual level, a cultural level, and an institutional level. Now, really quickly, this is the handout of the lens I was just speaking to, which is the dignity lens, which breaks down how we arrive at one of two places, as I said before. This would be something that you would get access to and that we would break down further and actually have an experience where you would get to understand this intuitively in some of our trainings. Another piece of that, as I just got done talking about, was like the tangible tool of reflective listening, having something that is an actual tangible tool that you can use with that lens that will allow you to lean into that collective humanity, that honoring that dignity of not only yourself, but other people. And then doing it with intention, understanding that reflection and reflecting back what we're hearing might possibly be something that you do naturally, but when we have an awareness of when we should do it and the different types, it can become very potent. Really easy way for us to springboard into empathy and understanding something that's fundamentally different than ourselves, which again gives us a greater understanding of these data points. Now we're not, as a community, prescribing what we think should be the solution based off of this data, but we're also having a collective understanding where we can disaggregate this data, and we have the skill set as a collective community to actually engage in discourse, to engage in conversation, to engage in a space where we actually understand what it is that we need, to wade in some uncomfortability, because these things are uncomfortable when we're talking about the differences in which, in the ways that we all live, the differences in our country of origin, the differences in the way that we experience life. And so I wanted to bring this back up before we end. And so this is a bit different than what we saw the first time. It's a bit more fleshed out, and that's intentional. As it started, I wanted to show that from a baseline standpoint, people are way more complex than what we really understand. And even in this experience, as we're trying to make sure that we're really focusing on national origin, there are times that we unfortunately get brought into a straw man where we're not recognizing the collective identity and the collective humanity of all people. The things that we're seeing here, the things that are below that iceberg, are the things that fundamentally make up the sublimation of who someone is. The things that oftentimes are more important than those things that you can see at the top. and those things that you can hear when someone speaks with an accent. And so it's important for us to, yes, at the same time, recognize the disparities, the ways in which we experience race, ethnicity, and national origin. But just as important, the only way that we're going to combat any of these disparities, any of the ways in which we feel like we're undermined, is if we get to the root cause. And the root cause is, unfortunately, we do not understand how to truly seek understanding with the things that are below that iceberg. We don't know how to acknowledge them, how to honor them within ourselves as well as other people. And so the process that we go through is a process of discovering ourselves, because it's the only thing that we can really control, and then understanding how we can manifest something outside of ourselves that we now have within. Empathy, love, dignity, respect. All of these things that we like to say are very important. We need to make sure that we spend the time to refine ourselves and learn how to bring it into existence. And so as I come to a close, many of the pieces that we talked about today are actually connected to bystander intervention and cultural awareness training that we do. What you're looking at on the screen is a flyer for our upcoming bystander intervention training on March 16th. It is a 3-hour training. I know that sounds crazy, but I promise you, the intention is to make sure that we're not undermining any of your time and that we're actually creating an experience where you're intuitively feeling the things that I just talked about. And it's not just someone reading it or talking at you, or you leaving without having an understanding of something that you can tangibly do moving forward to lean in and become your most authentic self, to honor the most authentic self in those that are around you. And so the bystander intervention training, if you is on our social media, is also here. I'll make sure that any information, all this information is sent out. But for bystander intervention, the intention is to make sure that from a standpoint of when we find ourselves in these spaces where we might see something or an interaction that's unpleasant, that we have the tools and the mechanisms to make sure that we can step up and shift whatever dynamic is happening in that space so that we can help a targeted person reclaim their power. Not only that, some of the components that we just talked about, as I said before, the data pieces and those collective skills are also infused in order to give us a greater understanding of what's needed in order for us to shift into this sometimes difficult territory. So I definitely hope to see some of you at the training. And there are also many more subsequent trainings that we have as well, which you can always check on our website or our social medias as we post pretty frequently. But this was the one that was coming up and I felt was most relevant for what we're talking about today. Also, just a little bit more information. Although we are dealing with the COVID pandemic, our office is still serving you all. We work for you all. And so anything that we can give you in terms of resources, if you're being discriminated against and you need assistance, our office is still open. We are just not open to the public in terms of like walk-in like we normally would. But you can still contact us with the following information with our office phone or even just our regular email. And just a little bit easier for you to tell if you would like to write that down. And we are, again, I apologize for the typo, the Howard County Office of Human Rights and Equity now. We've shifted. But our phone number is still the same and our email is still the same. So at this time, I actually would like to end the presentation portion and just open up for question and answer. I didn't get a chance to check the chat. And so I might need a little bit of help making sure that I'm getting to everyone's question.
Well, first of all, Trent, that was amazing, amazing presentation. Thank you so much. I feel I learned so much. I always have. Attending your sessions been always the top, amazing experience I've had in the past as well. So at this time, since we are such a small group, we could have more sort of intimate discussion if you want to just unmute your mics and, ask your questions, your thoughts, any other topic any topic that Trent covered that you would like to learn more of. Please feel free to chime in. We have a good 20 minutes. And
Yeah,
we're not
definitely ask
restricted on
me
time.
if
Yes.
you'd like me to go in
Okay.
depth.
Thank you.
I definitely can.
I unmute myself and I unmute my camera too. Thank you very much, Trent and Mandeep, for organizing. And it's so refreshing to see that Howard County is moving in this direction, certainly the right direction to move. I appreciate the emphasis you put in remarking that these were just data points. And you did it many times. So that was an interesting point because we tend to look at data points and give a weight to them. And certainly politicians and officers, government officers, are base policy on data points, right? That's what they
100%.
have, and that's the way they operate. So one question was, how do you, what type of resistance do you find for them to really mention the concept of data points versus this new vision of there is much more than a data point, beyond the data point, there is a family, a kid, right, an access.
Yeah.
So how do you take this?
So that is a really, really good question. I would have to draw from actual experience I had. And so before I was in the Office of Human Rights, I was in the local children's board, which is in DCRS, Department of Community Resources and Services. So another human services branch. In that branch, it's huge. There's a lot of different human services. So we have a lot of data, a lot of things that like the different offices would entail. In that space, it was important for us to recognize, okay, what are the disparities that people are not paying attention to? The things that are kind of like underneath. And so we did an equity report to actually outline all of this. In order for us to have a true equity report, part of that process and part of breaking it down for the gatekeepers was having to get them to understand that facilitated dialogue and focus groups, where you're genuinely leaning in and it's like, okay, so we have this data, and based off of this data, we would like to have a conversation around this. And then not just having a one and done, but like continuing to do it. And then bringing that qualitative and quantitative data to the table. And then saying, this is the story that's being told, is essentially what has to happen. Doing it that way, and that's kind of how I've always been primed to interact with information, especially around humanity, like our collective humanity. I haven't personally seen very much pushback. Now, that's because it's a sound. I mean, you have, again, that qualitative and quantitative. So you have the data points and you literally have citizens. This isn't Trent saying that this is the truth. This is literally citizens saying this is their reality. And so what you will have, I think, in terms of pushback sometimes is that when you get the answer, and it means that there has to be a drastic change, the speed at which that changes, or if it's kind of, maybe sometimes lulled until it's not as big of an issue or isn't at the surface, can sometimes happen. But you have to have, again, citizens who are informed and aware, have an understanding of how to disaggregate the data and understand how to articulate themselves enough in order to speak to the realities that they are experiencing. And so the back end for us is to make sure that we're equipping the citizens to be able to communicate exactly what they need to. That it's not us being in a way of trying to influence what's being said.
Right.
It's us making sure that people actually have the agency to say it.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, I'm glad and I'm hopeful now that things that there is a chance to move forward in the right direction. Thank you. Thank you.
And I feel like even with, like I don't think these are Pyrrhic victories when we get like recognitions, like proclamations for months like this. Like this is codified in history now for us to recognize that it is important enough for the county on a baseline level to lean further into how are we treating people who are moving into this space and calling it their home. And that's a reality and will always be a reality for all citizens. And so these smaller things that are happening are a result of, I'd say, what I was just describing, the fact that this is happening more and more, that people are starting to be able to have the agency to speak up, and that those gatekeepers, those change makers, those politicians are actually having, the intrinsic motivation to actually shift.
Trent, are your counterparts in Montgomery County doing something similar or paying attention to the same issues?
So I can speak for, again, from my personal experience. When we started doing the bystander intervention and having to shift everything over to virtual, because we still had to provide human service, but we just didn't have the ability to do it in person. We reached out and were reached out to by a lot of the surrounding counties, because we actually have had a lot of success in changing over everything that we did in person to virtual. And that was something that the outreach team, we were intentionally leaning into, making sure that any program that we did, any presentation, any workshop, that we could convert it to virtual and that we would understand what was needed. As a result of that, we started being able to help like Montgomery County, Hartford County with the issues that they were coming up against, and being able to also shift some of the things that they needed to. Now, in terms of them leaning in as much as Howard County, from what I've seen, I think Howard County leans in a lot more than other spaces, and not only just in this region, but in the United States. And I think that sometimes also, not to go deep down a rabbit hole, but I think that also sometimes shoots us in the foot, where we'll have like a AAA rating for 24 years in a row because we're an amazing county, but that also doesn't allow us to really look at what are some critical like feedback pieces that we should be really leaning into, as opposed to just saying that we're an amazing county, even though we are amazing. How can we be more amazing?
Yeah, dominate the discussion, Mandeep. Just one more, because you are an amazing country. However, Hispanics and Blacks are fleeing. They are not living there. They were before, but now they aren't. Mm-hmm. So it is some amazing place for them to go, right?
And so that's again, it's really important. It's the perfect example of like, okay, so what are we truly leaning into? How far has a pendulum swung based off of data points? Because you can do a lot based on data that you see. Like, for example, and I don't want to take us too far down the rabbit hole, but if you look at the poverty rate within Howard County and you just look at that, the highest rate of poverty is people who identify as white. However, when you overlay that with what the population actually is, and again, 50% of our population is white, there should be 35% of the population or comparable at the poverty rate, because that would mean that there's not overrepresentation or underrepresentation at the poverty level. However, that is not true for Black or Hispanics. There's overrepresentation. And so what that means is that there's something happening in our systems, or at least in our county, that is making it so that from a resource standpoint, from a socioeconomic standpoint, that there are more people that you're more likely, if you're a person of color or if you're Hispanic, to be below the poverty line. And like below the poverty line is, I believe, making I think it's $20,000 a year in a family of 4 or something like that. But like so when we put that into perspective, the fact that we even have people who are living that reality in Howard County is very different notion than what we hear normally about Howard County. Like we hear that Howard County is amazing, that we're doing all these things, but there are people here who are suffering. And there are ways in which they're suffering, possibly because of disparities or hiccups in the system that we haven't looked at yet.
And thank you, Ophelia. One other question I would like to chime in for the response from Montgomery County. So the county exec and the council, they've been super supportive, and they're actually currently working on the proclamation, the similar proclamation like the Howard County did. So there's an interest, there's a commitment, and learning from Trent, there have been so many things in sort of collaboration between these different counties. So seems like we're headed the right direction. Seems like the right time to do the right thing. So I'm super excited about it.
And you are such an engine behind all these. Congratulations, Mandeep. Yeah, you're really moving forward this agenda.
We all, with the collective support, the collective humanity, it will. That's the only way to move forward. So I feel fortunate to have all of this support from everyone. And we still have questions, time for questions. If anybody want to ask more questions, I'll mute myself.
Trent, first of all, thank you. That was amazing, and I'm going to try to make that training. Quick question: non-Howard County people can join that 3-hour training, or do you have to be a Howard County resident?
No, you don't have to be a Howard County citizen. Okay, great. Now, so how that training and most of our trainings work, we have a request form because we started getting an influx of requests for presentations and stuff. And so what we had to do is streamline them. And so in our request form, what we usually will ask is that 6 weeks in advance, if you want to do, like, say you want to do a bystander intervention training, but you want it for a specific cohort. If you send us that information, essentially what I would do is I would meet with you. I go over and just inquire about, okay, so what is the purpose, the takeaway, how could we make sure that this was fruitful? And then I essentially alter what we have as our normal plan and insert what is needed. And so we've done one for Harford County where I essentially had to go in and make sure that some of the issues that they were interacting with around race and religion were a part of the training. So I had to revamp what we did for the experiential portion. I took out all the data points and replaced them with Harford County data points, so on and so forth. And so if you just join a general one, like the one that is on the 16th, you're just basically learning about Howard County. So if you're not from Howard County, you would just basically be learning about Howard County data points. But again, the root of what we're exploring, which is disaggregation of data, communication skills, understanding of cultural humility, is something that anybody could connect to. Okay, great. I did have a perhaps more esoteric question, and if you will indulge me, I'll tell a quick story, but it's about how to deal with people of privilege who have been hardwired wrong from their youth, but know it's wrong. So the story is my father. So I'm from Vermont, and years ago I brought a friend up to ski, and we all stayed at my parents' house, and he brought his girlfriend. Now, he was from Croatia, and she was from Jamaica. And so my dad, who grew up in the 40s and 50s, hardwired, raised in Ohio. So at the time and place, racism wasn't just prevalent, it was accepted, right? And so he wanted to prove he wasn't racist. So he kept going on and on about how beautiful this woman was from Jamaica. And I mean, over and over again. I finally pulled him aside and I said, Dad, if she was white, would you have told her 20 times that she was beautiful? Or would you have said it once and let her accept the compliment? He's like, oh, right. So what do you do if people want to change, but just have no idea how? I think that the core of what you did is exactly what you do, awareness, right? But I think the way that you do it, I think it's easy, especially right now, for people to not want to be gentle with one another. Like they can essentially justify being nasty or falling into the same trap that we're trying to get people not to do in the first place. And so for me personally, I'm a Black male with locks. I interact with people all the time where I can recognize that something is happening, like there's wheels turning for them. And instead of me getting heightened, feeling slighted, what I like to do is to literally just ask questions and reflect back what I'm hearing from them. And so if someone asks me a question or something like that, I'll respond to the question based on how they respond, or if I'm trying to get to know them, I'll reflect back what I'm hearing them say. So it's not about me in the moment. I'm genuinely trying to get to understand you. the easiest way that you can help someone want to rewire their own brain, because you can't rewire it for them, is to have a relationship of trust with them, build rapport. Even with loved ones, we might think that we automatically have rapport with them because they're our loved ones, but we don't. There are some people that you might not feel safe communicating certain things to. And so there are really, really easy ways that really quickly, even if it's a stranger, you can do things that allow yourself to be vulnerable in that exchange, that let them know, hey, I'm actually seeking to understand and I'm listening to understand. That's the easiest way for me. If you can get to the root cause of why someone is feeling weird about something or why they're interacting with it, what normally comes down to is the unknown, outright fear, or a distorted experience that they had. And so for your story, as an example with your dad, if you take it, if like, imagine just taking him to the side and saying that, and for him, it could have been an aha moment, because you could have been like just thinking about how it's displayed. Dad, yo, I love that you're truly trying to make my friends feel welcome. But yo, can I point something out really quick that I noticed? Yeah, of course, because you're asking for permission at that point. You're not just giving it to them. So I noticed that you continually talking about the beauty of X, Y, and Z. And for me, I'm wondering if you would do that with a white person. And if I'm wondering that, I'm wondering what she's wondering. And so you allow him to literally come up with his own understanding of what is the impact of your action. Like, as a facilitator, something that used to work really well was this thing called SBI, situation, behavior, and impact. I'm not putting anything, like any sauce on it. It's not personal at all. All I'm doing is I'm telling you, this is the situation. So I'm describing the situation. This is the behavior that I saw like displayed in that situation from you. And this was the impact as a result of that. That's it. And so maybe when your dad kept saying that, maybe your friend got quiet. So you go up to your dad, if you want to use the same thing I said before, the SBI model is, hey, Dad, so I noticed that you really wanted everyone to feel welcome. And as a result, you kept saying that she was really pretty and complimenting like her beauty. What I saw happen though is I think it kind of made her feel uncomfortable, because it might have made her feel more seen. Or even if you don't want to put that in part, you could literally let him name it for himself, but you're naming something in a concrete fashion that allows that person to own it. There is no judgment involved, and you're stepping away from it and allowing them to have their own thought process. So they can critically think about it if they want. They can push back on what you said if they want, but like, we're not having ownership of it because we're not taking it personal. So like, even if you say something like that and they're like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Da, 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 da. Okay. I was just thinking that, it would be something to give some thought to, but we're not as invested to where we feel like I need you to change your mind, because that's never going to work.
That's great advice. It's going to be hard not to judge my dad, but I can do it.
Oh no, I just spilled water on my laptop.
Oh, sorry. I need to leave. I have at 1 o'clock, but thank you so much, Trent. Well said. And Mandeep, and for organizing. Nice to meet you, Chris.
Definitely.
Thank you, Ophelia. Thank you.
I get off too.
And we may have another couple minutes. If there are any other last minute questions, we could.
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, Alexa, we can hear you.
Awesome. Sorry, it is very early where I'm at, so I'm actually driving to work. So sorry, I can't put my, sorry, I don't have my camera on at the moment. I can put it on very shortly, but I just wanted to say that was so amazing for me, Trent. Just kind of like a personal reaction. Hold on, I'm gonna try to put my camera on now. I just got to work. Can you see me? Hi.
I can.
Yeah, hi. Oh man, I am so glad that I tuned into this today. It is so inspiring, so beautiful, and so validating for me to see what you have created and what you continue to create with the gifts that you have. I myself have a curriculum that I developed and teach, and it's in a really critical point right now where what I do with it is going to have a big impact. And so there could not have been a better time for me to hear this. I want to repeat what you said about things often coming from the unknown, fear, or distorted experiences. That is something that I am going to go immediately write down. I continue to be just amazed by you, and I did laugh out loud a few times hearing you speak, because when I comparing to my own lectures and my own things, just the language that you use, it could not be more obvious that you are one of my most impactful mentors. So I just want to thank you face to face as much as we can. I want to thank you for being you, and really acknowledge and recognize how influential you have been on what I've been able to create and offer. Maybe we should have our own personal phone call check-in, so I don't take group time. But that was so beautiful. I'm so glad I tuned in, and yeah, thank you so much, Trent.
Thank you. I definitely miss you. And just for transparency, I worked with Alexa during the time where I really honed my facilitation skills at Penn State. And so trial by fire of us interacting with the wildest things ever and having to find a way to be a neutral party for people. And so that means a lot, because I know, just like you know, that during that time, I knew we were doing something special and that we could cultivate it into something else. So I really appreciate the affirmation, and we'll 1000% need to talk more, because we can continue to expand.
And thank you, Alexa.
Yeah,
that was
absolutely.
beautiful. We loved hearing your feedback, and we so appreciate that you tuned in. And thank you so much, Trent. This was amazing. And as we continue our celebration, we're just kicking off the program today. We look forward to having everybody back again next Wednesday. So every Wednesday we'll have a webinar series presenting a phenomenal speaker every week. So Trent, you set the bar really high today. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, Alexa.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Mindy.
Bye-bye. Bye.